It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, just me, Ethan, and Dylan heading out to the deep woods for the weekend. We hadn't camped in months, and Ethan was itching for a night under the stars. We found a spot by the creek, set up the tent, gathered firewood, and before long, the night wrapped the forest in a blanket of darkness. The fire flickered in front of us, casting long shadows on the trees. Dylan, always the storyteller, decided it was time for a ghost story. "Ever hear about the Goatman?" he asked, his voice low, eyes flickering with mischief as the flames reflected in them. I rolled my eyes. "Oh, here we go." But Ethan leaned forward, interested. "Goatman, like that thing in Maryland?" Dylan grinned. "Exactly, but it's not just Maryland, man. People have been seeing it all over. Texas, Kentucky, even up here, in these woods." I looked around, suddenly a little less skeptical. I hadn't thought much of it when we picked the spot, but the woods here were dense, dark. The fire only illuminated a few feet around us. Beyond that, it was just blackness. Dylan continued, his voice growing quieter, making us lean in to hear. "They say he looks like a man, but with the legs of a goat. Big horns on his head, walks upright most of the time, but when he moves fast, he drops to all fours, running like an animal. But that's not the scariest part." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's scarier than a giant goat man with horns?" "The fact that he blends in. He doesn't just jump out at you from the shadows. He waits. He can mimic people, make himself look like your friends. You're sitting around a campfire just like this, and you start to notice something's off. You know how many people you came with, but suddenly you're not so sure. Someone's voice doesn't sound right, or you catch a strange look in their eye. But by then, it's too late." The fire crackled as Dylan paused for effect, glancing between us. The woods were silent, save for the distant rush of the creek and the occasional crack of branches shifting under the weight of the fire. "And then what?" I asked, unable to hide the slight tension in my voice. "Then, one by one, he picks you off. Quietly, until there's only one person left, sitting in the dark, wondering if the last person with them is real or if it's the Goatman." Ethan chuckled, but I could tell he wasn't fully relaxed anymore. "That's messed up, man." Dylan leaned back, satisfied. "Well, you wanted a ghost story." The fire popped, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The air felt heavier, like the woods themselves were pressing in on us. Then, from the darkness, we heard a rustling. I snapped my head toward the sound. "You guys hear that?" Ethan laughed nervously. "Dylan, did you plan that? You've got someone out there, don't you?" Dylan shook his head, eyes wide. "I swear, man, I didn't bring anyone else." Another rustle, this time closer. My heart thudded in my chest. "It's probably an animal," I muttered, trying to convince myself. But then Ethan stood up. "I'm going to check it out. Probably just a raccoon." "Don't," Dylan said quickly. "Seriously, just stay here. Whatever it is, it'll go away." But Ethan was already walking toward the trees, his flashlight beam cutting through the blackness. "I'll be back in a sec," he called over his shoulder. The fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. I leaned toward Dylan. "This is getting weird." He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the tree line where Ethan had disappeared. Minutes passed, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Then, from the darkness, Ethan's voice called out, "Hey, guys, come here." I stood up, but Dylan grabbed my arm. "Don't." "What? It's Ethan." But Dylan shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "No, it's not. Think about it. We're here, all together, and suddenly, he's out there, calling to us. What if it's not him?" I hesitated, goosebumps rising on my arms. Dylan was right. Something about Ethan's voice was off. Too flat, too calm. "Hey, "What are you waiting for? Come check this out," the voice repeated, more insistent now. My stomach churned and I backed away from the tree line, my breath quickening. Dylan's grip tightened on my arm. "We stick together," he whispered. "Don't let it divide us." Suddenly, a snap echoed through the woods, followed by heavy footsteps running. Ethan's voice screamed out, this time frantic, desperate. "Guys, help! It's coming!" Without thinking, I darted forward, but Dylan yanked me back just as a figure broke through the tree line. It was Ethan, or at least, it looked like him. But something was wrong. His face was too pale, his eyes too wide, and his movements were jerky, like he wasn't sure how to use his own body. "Stay back!" Dylan shouted, pushing me behind him. The figure stopped, standing just at the edge of the firelight. It looked at us, its head tilting unnaturally to the side, and then, in a voice that sounded almost like Ethan's, it said, "What's wrong? It's me." Dylan's hand trembled as he raised the flashlight. "You're not Ethan." The thing that looked like Ethan smiled, but the expression never reached its eyes. "Come on, guys, stop playing around." And then, with a speed that made my blood run cold, it dropped to all fours and sprinted into the woods, vanishing into the blackness. Dylan and I stood frozen, hearts pounding. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then, a soft rustle behind us made us turn. A second figure stepped into the firelight, Ethan. But this time, I wasn't sure. "Guys," he said, his voice trembling. "What the hell was that?" Dylan took a step back. "How do we know it's really you?" Ethan looked at us, eyes wide with fear. "What are you talking about? It's me. I swear." But Dylan wasn't having it. "Prove it." Ethan blinked. "How the hell am I supposed to prove it?" I was frozen in place, watching them argue, trying to piece together what was happening. I knew there were 3 of us when we started. 3 friends on a camping trip. But now, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one too many. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I no longer knew who was real. My heart pounded, sweat dripping down my forehead. The fire flickered between Ethan and Dylan, both staring at me, waiting for me to choose. Then, in the silence, I heard a whisper, low and raspy, coming from somewhere behind me. "You're next."